चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा माह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुं श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवं च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथं वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललितां श्रीविशाखान्वितं च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते। तप्त कंचन गौरंगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुस्तुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वंशकल्पतरुभयश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Thank you all for joining, and I'll share the screen first. So today the verse that we are reading is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 13, verse 54. So little like trying to connect from what was discussed in the last verse. So basically verses 53 and 54 of this chapter 13, which is titled as Dhritarashtra quits home. He has already quit the home and he has left, and Yudhishthir Maharaj is disturbed. So Narad Muni comes and he reveals to Yudhishthira that the place where Dhritarashtra, and not only Dhritarashtra but Dhritarashtra, Gandhari as well as Kunti Devi have left for, and more importantly in these two verses the practice that Dhritarashtra is engaged in. So in verse actually 53, it is mentioned that Dhritarashtra, Gandhari and Kunti have left for the Himalayas, and more specifically they have left for a place which is called as Saptashruta. And here Dhritarashtra has engaged in a yoga called as Ashtang yoga system. So when this Ashtang yoga system is like perfectly done, it leads to four like outcomes. The first outcome, that is the control of the mind and senses, which is upashantatma. So the basically one becomes controlled with respect to his mind and senses. The second thing that follows when this first milestone is reached is the freedom of thoughts, especially the thoughts of the family, and that is Vigateshanaha. These two were covered in verse 53. So the next two outcomes is discussed in verse 54, which is absorption in Lord Hari. So once control of mind and senses happens, once the freedom of thought from the family is also achieved, then it leads to the absorption in Lord Hari, which is called as Hari Bhavnaya. And when that happens, when one is focused on this thought of the Lord, then immunity from the contamination of three modes happen, which is this Dvasta, Raja, Sattva, Tamo, Malaha. So I'll read the verse and then we'll go into reading the translation, purport, and the discussion. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.13.54. Jita Shano Jita Swasaha Pratyartha Sad Indriya Hari Bhavanaya Dvasta Rajaha Satvatamo Malaha. Translation: one who has controlled the sitting postures, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses towards the absolute personality of Godhead, and thus becomes immune to the contamination of the modes of material nature, namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The preliminary activities of the way of yoga are asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, dharna, etc. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was to attain success in those preliminary actions because he was seated in a sanctified place and was concentrating upon an objective, namely the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. Thus, all his senses were being engaged in the service of the Lord. This process directly helps the devotees to get freedom from the contaminations of the three modes of nature. Even the highest mode, the material mode of goodness, is also a cause of material bondage. And what to speak of other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. Passion and ignorance increase the material propensities of hankering for material enjoyment. And a strong sense of lust provokes the accumulation of wealth and power. One who has conquered these two base mentalities and has raised himself to the platform of goodness, which is full of knowledge and morality, cannot also control the senses, namely the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the ear, and touch. But one who has surrendered himself unto the lotus feet of Lord Hari, as above mentioned, one can transcend all influences of the modes of material nature and be fixed in the service of the Lord. The Bhakti Yoga process, therefore, directly applies the senses to the loving service of the Lord. This prohibits the performers from engaging in material activities. This process of turning the senses from material attachment to the loving transcendental service of the Lord is called pratyahara, and the very process is called pranayama, ultimately ending in samadhi or absorption in pleasing the Supreme Lord Hari by all means. So, when we read this, we can see that Dhritarashtra is engaged in the Ashtang Yoga process, which is soon I'll talk about it in brief about the process, what it is. But it can be easily seen that if he is involved in this Ashtanga Yoga process, then the question that may arise is in anyone's mind is that how come Dhritarashtra takes up this Ashtanga Yoga process, and more importantly, how he is able to focus on the name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. So, a quick recap that we know that it was Vidura who had instructed Dhritarashtra to take up this process. And we know that Vidura is a pure devotee of the Lord. So when a pure devotee of the Lord is engaged in basically is connects with any person, they have the propensity to give that empowerment for a person to progress on the spiritual path. So Dhritarashtra is really lucky to have Vidura in his life, especially in the last stage of his life. Now, the first step that in the first line in the purport, Prabhupada is telling about this Ashtang Yoga process. So it's very nice. I got about the details about the this Ashtang Yoga process from this article in Back to Godhead magazine by Jan Deepas Dasa, and I have just picked from here most of the things that I spoke. So this Ashtang Yoga system was actually conceived by the Rishi Patanjali, and it, as the name says, Ashta means eight. So there is a total of eightfold process. And this eightfold process starts with Yama and Niyama. Yama and Niyama basically are the do's and don'ts. Do this, don't do those, so that you can progress on this path. And if we see actually these yama and niyama or basically do's and don'ts are applicable both for the material and the spiritual success. And a common example of do's and don'ts is like as parents, we always chastise our children. Don't be engaged in so much of play and focus on your attention to studies. So basically, what are we doing? We are asking them to control their mind and not be engaged only in the fun activities, but do something which is important in their stage, which is to study. Similarly, if someone wants to progress on the spiritual path and takes up this Ashtanga yoga process, then they need to do certain things and not do other things. What is the goal of these do's and don'ts? The goal is basically to control the mind and the senses. So next to the yama and niyama comes the asana, then pranayama, and then pratyahara, which are actually the topics that are covered in this verse. So this asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and these are the stages in the process of Ashtang Yoga with the goal to be steady in one place, be able to sit in one place. Asana is sitting there for hours and hours and be steady. And then with the help of pranayama, focusing on the breathing process and gradually decrease the number of breath. And the contention or the thought process is that each living entity has a certain number of breath. Suppose I have 100,000 breath. After 100,000 breath, I will die. So if someone is progressing on this Ashtanga yoga process, if they increase their like slow down their breathing process, they will increase their lifespan. And that increased lifespan is needed because all these steps that are described in Ashtanga yoga, they take time to perfect. All of us are very like familiar with this, that even to control our mind, it takes so much of like efforts. Even Arjuna could not control his mind, and he says that the mind, controlling the mind is harder than controlling the wind. So obviously, a person, a yogi, needs a longer lifespan to perfect his life, and that's why this is the pranayama process. And then once this sitting posture and controlling of the breath has been under your belt, then the meditation starts on the prana and chakras, followed by meditating on the inner self. So getting away from the externals of mana, and more focus is now on internal mind, how the mind is working and how things are. So, and then from mind to the super soul. So, beyond these three comes the stage of dharna, which is the sixth stage, then dhyana, and then finally samadhi. So it's in the samadhi, which is the final stage, when a yogi is ready to leave the body. And with the help of this whole Ashtang yoga process, is able to exit from the 9 gates of the body, most of the time from the head, and reach the destination that he or she is aspiring for. So, coming back to this verse, now after giving a brief talk or brief glimpse of that the process of the Ashtang yoga, Prabhupada then mentions that Maharaj Dhritarashtra was to attain the success in those preliminary actions because he was seated in a sanctified place. He was sitting in the foothills of Himalayas and was concentrating upon one objective, namely the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, as we discussed, because of the mercy of the pure devotee Vidura. Now, beyond this, the rest of the purport here, Prabhupada is actually taking it as a preaching opportunity to explain Bhakti Yoga and trying to explain that why Bhakti Yoga is a more not easy, but it's a appealing process than this eightfold Ashtanga yoga process, which requires so much of controlling kind of artificially. So Prabhupada says that when a devotee is engaged in the service of Lord, he will automatically be overcoming all the three modes of material nature, which are the modes of ignorance, passion, and goodness. So this is something very common, which anyone who has been engaged in preaching would have encountered. That when we talk about all this Krishna consciousness, or we try to engage people in this spiritual talk, many of the potential people will say that, oh, I think if we do good to others, do not engage in bad things, then we are good. God will be happy and will bless us and will be all prosperous. But all of us, we also know by Prabhupada's mercy that one who is engaged in doing good to others, or one who is engaged in doing good in life and not engaging in the bad things, he is still at the platform of the mode of goodness. And when he is at the mode of the goodness, we also know that he is still under the clutches of Maya, who is controlling everyone with these three modes. So we all have to transcend above these three modes. So we have to transcend, meaning we have to go above even the mode of goodness. So staying at this mode of goodness is no good. We have to go above it if we are serious about our spiritual journey. So now, what is the problem? Isn't doing something in the good mode of goodness and overcoming the mode of passion not great? Will we not get any pious credits? Yes, we will get the pious credits, but that's all. Because we know that we have to overcome the material concept of life, transcend the material concept of life, which includes going above the mode of goodness. So that's what is explained in the line. I'll highlight it. Even the highest mode, the material mode of goodness, is also a cause of material bondage. And what to speak of other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. Passion and ignorance increase the material propensities of hankering for material enjoyment, and a strong sense of lust provokes the accumulation of wealth and power. One who has conquered these two base mentalities and has raised himself to the platform of goodness, which is full of knowledge and morality, also cannot also control the senses, namely the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the ear, and touch. So, although one may be able to control and come above the mode of passion and in ignorance, but if one is stuck at the mode of the goodness, the problem is that he cannot control the senses. And if he is not able to control the senses, there is no progression, because we saw even in Ashtang Yoga, the first is do's and don'ts, the niyama and yama and niyama, where we have to control the senses. So moving on, when we fully engage in helping the needy, people in the society, we may be in the goodness. Then what will happen when we are engaged in doing all this good work? Some since the senses are not controlled, we may develop some emotions, we may develop some expectations, and then we will be entangled in this material thing. But a devotee who is engaged in the loving service of the Lord, the key is loving service to the Lord, which is stated here by by Prabhupada. So when a devotee is engaged in the loving service of the Lord, he is able to go above all these three modes, and is also able to control the mind and his senses. So, and more importantly, what is the nice thing about this bhakti process is that not only that a person will be able to overcome these three modes and control the mind and senses, but he doesn't have to go to the secluded place in the Himalayas and try to control his outer thought process, try to go inside. No, wherever he is, in whatever ashrama and whatever varna he is in, he can practice this process of bhakti yoga and be engaged in the loving service of the Lord. So, what is the difference between a person who is engaged in bhakti yoga versus a normal person? I'll quote an example which Pratibha always gives in his classes. Like, suppose um, two people go to the grocery store. One is a devotee of the Lord, of Krishna, and another is a normal person who is in the mode, mostly acting in the mode of goodness. And both of them see nice mangoes in this grocery store. So, what will be the thought process of the person who is in the mode of goodness? A nice person. Oh, wow, mangoes. Ah, I love mangoes. And oh, it's the Alfonso mangoes, the king of mangoes. They taste the best. Let me buy them, and I want to eat them immediately once I'm in the car, once I'm out of the grocery store and I have paid for it. That will be his thought process. Nothing wrong in that, but he's thinking about himself and his enjoyment. Whereas when a devotee goes to the store and when he sees these mangoes, the thought process that comes, his consciousness is, since in his consciousness it's Krishna that is residing. His life is centered around Krishna. It will be, oh wow, such nice mangoes. Let me buy them, nicely cut them, and offer it to Krishna. Krishna will be so happy to have these mangoes, which are especially the Alfonso mangoes. And if Krishna will be pleased, it will be so nice. The act is the same of seeing the mangoes, using the senses, but the consciousness is different between a person who is engaged in bhakti yoga versus a person who is in the mood of goodness. So hopefully that gives an idea that how bhakti yoga is easy, can be accomplished by any simple person, doesn't require any big paraphernalia or big endeavors like in the Ashtang yoga process. Then comes the most basic and fundamental difference between this Ashtang yoga versus the Bhakti yoga process. Yogis try to elevate themselves in Ashtang yoga by their own mental and intellectual efforts. So they are trying to depend on themselves to overcome all these material glitches and whatever is binding them. Whereas when someone takes up this bhakti yoga process, it's basically we call out to Krishna. We say Hare Krishna. We go through this Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And when we are calling out Krishna, why are we calling out Krishna? We are asking that please help us engage in your service. Please engage us at your in the service at your lotus feet. So there is a difference. Nothing is on our own. We are asking Krishna to provide us the help so that we can engage in his service. So we are actually totally dependent on Krishna's mercy so that we can be in his service. And Prabhupada has said that if one calls out to Krishna, Krishna never fails his devotees. And that's also in the Bhagavad Gita that is stated. To explain this difference between Bhakti Yoga, a person engaged in Bhakti Yoga versus a person who is trying to accomplish the spiritual goal on his own, he gives a very nice example of a kitten and a baby monkey which are being carried by their respective mothers. The kitten, we all, I'm sure you would have seen, otherwise you can always Google and find out. The cat will hold the kitten through the neck and the kitten will not be afraid. And on top of it, it will nicely hold it and take it from one place to the other. So it's the mother cat holding and taking the kitten from one place to other. The kitten doesn't have to do anything, just hang and watch around nicely. What about the baby monkey? The baby monkey has to tightly hold the mother monkey, and when the mother monkey is moving from one place to other, jumping from one branch to the, it's totally the strength at which this baby monkey is holding to the mother. If he loosens the grip, he will fall down because the mother monkey is engaged in jumping from one place to the other. The mother monkey is not holding the baby. So those who are engaged in this bhakti yoga process, their condition is like that of a kitten. It's Krishna who is holding them and helping them in this Krishna conscious process. Whereas those who are trying to progress on in this spiritual journey by taking up Ashtang yoga or any other process, they are like the baby monkeys trying to do it on their own strength by holding like in the case of the monkey. So obviously, if the hold or the grip goes down, the chances are we will fall down in back into this material world. So the realization we all get is that without Krishna's mercy, we are nothing, and we need His help to overcome this clutches of Maya. And actually, I'll end this talk with this verse of Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna himself says that in Bhagavad Gita 7.14, Devi hi esha gunamai mama maya durataya mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. This divine energy of mine, he's referring to the material energy Maya Devi, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. So Krishna himself is saying it's difficult to overcome this three modes of material nature. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So if someone takes up the Bhakti Yoga process and depends on Krishna, surrenders to Krishna, he will help us to cross this three modes of material nature. So with this, I will stop and see if there is any sharing anyone would like to expand upon this topic or say any realizations. If not, I'll just share. I heard someone.
Yeah, this is Lingaraj.
Okay, Prabhu. If not, I was asking Premananda Mataji yesterday about this question that how come Dhritarashtra takes up this Ashtang Yoga process and focuses on Lord Hari. And I was not able to connect the dots. So she was the one who pointed out that yes, it was Vidura who helped Dhritarashtra to take up this process. But she said that it is also important to note that Prabhupada has mentioned that Dhritarashtra could not attain Goloka or any of the Vaikuntha planets. He could reach only Brahma Jyoti because did not get Krishna's mercy. So we need Krishna's mercy. So with that, Lingaraju Prabhu, should
Question,
we end the
Mataji.
call?
Quick question, Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you for that last comment.
Thank you. I don't know
Point.
if I can answer your question, but
No, I mean,
there are so many here.
it looks like, I mean, Dhritarashtra perfected in this process of Ashtanga Yoga also very quickly. He did not,
Yes,
we hear that it is a long process and it takes very, I mean, long time. But in this case, Dhritarashtra, I mean, perfected in that process of Ashtanga Yoga very quickly.
yes, Prabhu.
I'm just trying to understand how he could do it so quickly. Uh,
Yes, Prabhu. This is a question I think we all get into because we as practicing bhaktas we see so many hurdles in our lives, and we also from some brief idea about Ashtang yoga we know that it's such a long tedious process, and especially this was a process that was being taken up in Sat Yuga when people had long life, long years to live, thousands of years.
yes.
So the way I could understand based on talking with Pratibhahu, Premananda Mataji, as well as from Prabhupada's explanation is that he had reached a point in his life where he was able to overcome all the material attachments or entanglement, and the number of years that one takes to reach that perfection is the process takes time to overcome these material attachments or thing. He had already been able to reach that point in his lifetime, and that's why he was able to quickly go to the last stage, last few steps of the Ashtang yoga process and exit this material world by the mercy of Vidura, who instructed him to take up this process. So it's in one way empowerment coming from the pure devotee, but because Vidura did not have enough time for because seeing Dhritarashtra's impending death, he could instruct him only to this process and not further about going to Goloka or Vrinda or Vaikuntha planets. And that's like very preliminary answer, Prabhu, but I will open it up for others who, if someone can expand upon it. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Straight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhu. So, any thoughts on your side, Prabhu?
No, I mean, that came just now.
Okay.
I know generally we hear Bhakti Yoga is, I mean, and of course we know the devotees who perfected life within moment, right? I mean, we don't need long time. I mean, but a lot of us takes more time because of our thing, not from the yoga, I mean, the potency of the Bhakti Yoga, right? So that has the power
Yes.
to take us even within a moment of association, right? So, but I was just thinking, I mean, I think here in this case, further, Narada Muni explains that within this fifth day or so, he will be leaving his body.
His body, exactly.
There was like not so much time she took because generally we hear Ashtanga Yoga takes long. So,
Yes. Not only that, we also know that even this basically the Anartha Nivritti stage, it's
yeah.
the biggest.
Mm.
Once one has crossed that, then the other stages can come immediately in few minutes or few seconds also. So probably guessing. I don't know, Prabhu. I
Mm.
shouldn't be guessing. Sorry.
Mm.
Okay. So should we stop here, Prabhu?
Yes, Mataji. No, no.
Okay. Thank you all. Hare Krishna.